Hello and welcome. I'm your host, William Liu. You are listening to the Hello and Welcome podcast presented by Betway. Actually, later on in the show, if you stay tuned towards the end of the show, we are actually going to be handing out 3 pairs of tickets to a upcoming Raptors game. There's only a couple games left in the season, but we do have some tickets for you, courtesy of Tangerine, and we'll share with you some details on how to get your hands on some free Raptor tickets. I know I've been saying the Raptors have been struggling. I mean, the Raptors have been struggling, but at the same time, I would definitely never say no to free Raptors tickets. So stay tuned towards the end of the show for that. But actually, today, we're not actually talking about the Toronto Raptors this season. We're talking about potential future members of the Toronto Raptors. We all know that the team has been tanking, like many others, towards the end of the season here. Raptors have not been as successful with the tanking, but ultimately the Raptors do want to maximize their chance at getting a top pick in this year's draft. You've heard a lot about this draft class. If you've been watching the NCAA tournament, you've been watching Duke. Duke probably has 3 lottery picks on their roster right now, and maybe even more first-round picks, depending on how you feel about some of their secondary guys. But this has been a really good draft, and I think that's probably why you've seen such a strong effort towards tanking. And so I want to take a look here today at 5 potential fits for the Toronto Raptors in this year's draft class. Truth be told, me being me, I actually have 8 players we'll take a look at, but I want to take a closer look at probably 5 of them first. And we're going to show you some film and just get people sort of acclimated in terms of like what style of player these guys are. Of course, the draft itself doesn't even take place until the end of June. Right now, it is just the beginning of April. So we're going to be taking a closer look at each of these guys individually, especially after the Raptors actually decide what lottery spot they're going to be in, because that lottery draw is going to be May 12th. That's probably the next major date on the Toronto Raptors calendar, will be that May 12th lottery selection. We'll see where the Raptors end up. But nevertheless, I wanted to take an earlier look at some of these prospects, and we'll actually look at some film, which will be kind of fun. Just to remind people, just in general, these are the lottery odds that the Toronto Raptors will be working with here. I think that, if we... hold on, let me just pull up the lottery odds. 1 second. Yes. Okay. So if we actually just... quickly look at what our odds are going to be. So the Raptors are pretty much tied into 7th in the standings, in the reverse standings. That actually means that they don't have a chance to pick 5th or 6th. Basically, the way the lottery works is you have a chance to jump into the top 4. But beyond that, you're pretty much going to be where you are. And if other teams jump into the top 4, you get pushed downwards down the stream. So right now, as it currently stands, and this is probably how it's going to end up, the Raptors most likely will finish with the 8th pick. That's actually, they have a 34% chance at the 8th pick. They have a 20% chance at the 7th pick. They have a 13% chance at the 9th pick. And then, of course, there's that 7.5% chance to get number 1. That will be Cooper Flag. 7.8 at number 2, 8.1% chance at 3, and 8.5 chance at 4. So it doesn't necessarily look that great. I feel like for people who are, I guess, a little bit down on this, I think that the one way to look at this in the optimistic sense is these are the exact same odds and the exact same position that the Raptors were in back in 2021, and that's when they landed Scotty Barnes. They jumped up into the lottery in that time. They got up to 4. So it's not impossible, but also at the same time, if we're looking at just the probabilities, the Raptors most likely will be drafting 7, 8, or 9 in this draft. Now, that is probably the working thesis I want to go off of here, because the prospects we'll look at today won't be like, let's watch Cooper Flag highlights, or let's watch Ace Bailey highlights, or let's watch Dylan Harper highlights. I think quite safely those 3 will be the top 3. Cooper will be 1, and then, I don't know, probably Harper or Ace will be number 2, just depending on sort of how the draft process works out. Especially if you look at most of the consensus mock drafts, that's kind of the order that's gone in. So, those are the top 3 guys. But from that point onwards, I think there probably is a range, probably between 4 and maybe even 8. I think at that point depends on sort of how these guys do in the draft combine, how they interview. Teams are doing a lot of scouting on these guys and getting more in depth into their backgrounds. Certainly that can sort of affect how they work. And also, I think at that point, it's also depending on how teams shape up after the lottery and their positions are set, what they will actually need. Because I actually do think that there's probably an element of you're drafting players for the fit instead of just drafting who's best overall. Every GM, when they talk publicly about it, they will say we are going to draft the best player available regardless of the fit, and that's sort of the safe answer you would give. But I also think realistically, you have to look at the fit with some of these guys, and so that's why I wanted to take a look at 5 players in this year's draft that would fit the Toronto Raptors. And I want to start with Maluach, somebody who I've talked about a lot here. And I think part of the reason is with Maluach is just he is a really, really skilled defensive big. For me, he would be the most impactful rim protector in this year's draft. I think you can look at some of these plays here. And again, we're looking at someone who's 7'2" with a 7'5" wingspan. The standing reach for him is 9'8", which is absurd because the rim is obviously 10 feet, so he's only 4 inches from the rim. And one way to sort of contextualize this is Victor Wembanyama's standing reach is 9'7", so he's got the same, or if not slightly longer, standing reach than Wemby. Now, of course, he's not the athlete that Wemby is, but at the same time, you can look at some of these highlights here where on this first play, I mean, this is literally the first play of the game, right? Like, this is the first play of the game. They're going up against Illinois with Kasparas Yakuchonis, who we'll talk about here in this video shortly later on as well. But you could see that Maluach literally on the first play of the game, as somebody who is that size, he's trapping at half court literally on the logo. And of course, this is a dedicated strategy by Duke in this game to really come out and pressure and take away the pull-up 3 threat from Kasparas. But the mobility for a player of his size to get out to that position is already kind of absurd. And of course, you see here a bit of a switch. Now he's going to recover back into the paint. Now he's going to, this is just the style of player that you would typically get. The rotations there where he's able to come up to the 3-point line and then close out back to the rim. This is the style of player that you're getting. Now, of course, on the offensive end, which we'll see some of the possessions here, it's more simplistic. It's especially his role for Duke on a team that is definitely the best team in the country. It'd be a disappointment if anyone else wins the tournament. His role on Duke is pretty specified. It's mostly catching lobs. It's mostly getting on the putbacks. He has taken a couple jumpers here and there, including a couple of threes, but realistically, the bulk of his game is being set up for him, whether it's by guys like Cooper Flagg or by guys like Konka Nipple. So he's primarily a guy who is going to get his offense set up for him. But I think, again, the value that he brings is on the defensive end. There's a lot of tape of him, in all sorts of positions. Of course, his probably best position defensively is still being in a deep drop, but he's not one of those bigs where, like, if he has to come out to the perimeter, he can do it. I think he's willing, certainly, to defend in all sorts of positions there. Again, you see him coming out against Will Riley, who we'll talk about a little bit on as well. Another shooter. So off a pick and roll here, he needs to come up and deny the 3-point shot, and that was clear strategy here. And you can see that he's like willing to come out and challenge all the way out to the 3-point line, and then obviously rotate behind him. Now, Duke is, again, the best team in the country. And so there's plenty of help behind him. A lot of plays for Duke involve having Cooper Flagg as the backline defender. And so it's, a little bit more easy for him to be more aggressive considering he has help in the form of the best player in the country behind him. But also at the same time, like, it just shows that mobility where, for a 7-footer of that size, he's able to protect the rim. And I think for the Raptors in particular, the fit here is the defensive end more than anything else. Certainly on offense, he still has a ways to go. You saw him, for example, get blocked there where he's in fairly deep position here. It's a good roll, it's a good catch, but he's gone up against another big player here. He takes out one power dribble to get closer to the rim, but you can see he's still trapped, and he gets a little bit low, which he's not necessarily using his size well. He's taller and bigger and longer than him. You should be able to get the shot off a little bit easier, but he's taking the power dribble, he's getting a little bit lower, and that actually makes it harder for him to get the shot off. You see ultimately he gets blocked. For him, he probably needs to get the lower body stronger. I think more than anything else, when you watch some of this stuff, it's like he does, you want to strike the right balance between not getting too big too fast. He certainly looks bigger than last year, for example, when he played in the Basketball Africa League. But at the same time, like I think for him, it's like, especially for somebody so tall, I feel like him getting his legs stronger will allow him to hold his position a little bit better, and be able to finish more of these plays. It's not like his touch is bad. I mean, overall, his actual finishing and efficiency has been really strong this year. He shot over 80% for a large part of the season, and it's like still in the high 70s. So, we're still talking about somebody who's really efficient. But ultimately, I think that there are things that you can polish up on the offensive end, but I think defensively the fit is definitely there. The size, the mobility, the instincts to sort of snuff out a lot of shots. I know the block numbers aren't particularly high on him, but I think more than anything else, when you really look at it, like there's a lot of games where if you watch Duke play, like teams won't even try to attempt shots at the rim because of his presence there. They're sort of bailing out on drives or kicking it out. They're trying to shoot more from three. And I think that more than anything else is a little bit more important than, let's say, just like the raw block numbers themselves. But I think on the offensive end, there certainly is a question. They didn't run a lot of offense at all through him. Whereas the Toronto Raptors, the way that we like to play, we certainly will have a lot of sets where the big starts the offense. Just think of Jakob Poeltl, for example. A lot of offense starts with Yak. I don't think you can do that with Maluach, especially not right now. He doesn't have that ability to, dictate the offense or anything like that. I think one thing that's kind of underrated too with him is he needs to improve for me on the screening end. I think the more film that you watch on him, I think like when he gets a good screen and he rolls to the basket, it's really easy. I think people have pointed this out, but like he has a gigantic catch radius, and so if you're throwing a lob up to him, it's pretty easy for guys to set him up. But I also think that there's instances, especially if he's not setting the on-ball screen, if he's setting an off-ball screen, let's say he's trying to pin a shooter to get open. Like that's a good screen right there, right? He gets enough of a step and then boom, like the lob is right there. It's pretty easy. But I feel like off ball, sometimes he doesn't necessarily nail his guy enough. He doesn't necessarily create that separation. And so I think that that's another thing where maybe it's just him learning basketball. Maybe that's just him getting a little bit stronger in the base as well. He's certainly big enough to like crush anybody on a screen when we're talking about the biggest player in this year's draft. But yeah, for me, I think with Maluach, like there is a clear defensive floor there, where I think that there's a future starting center here. I think with the Raptors, if the Raptors were to pick him, he would be the backup center behind Jakob. But I think that it will give the Raptors a succession plan ahead of Jakob, depending on sort of how Maluach comes along. And then on the offensive end, like probably a roller, probably a guy who catches, a couple lobs per game. Again, it really helps if you have more shooting to sort of run some of those plays with. I think a lot of the lobs that he's getting are from guys like Cooper, are from guys like Konkanippel. Those guys all offer, a huge threat to the defensive end of the floor. And so, most times that the defensive attention is going to be focused on him rather than on Maluach rolling to the basket. But nevertheless, like I think that there's certainly a fit here with Toronto. I think that the Raptors definitely need a backup big more than anything else. And I think long term going forward, it's maybe about the development offensively. I think some people have pointed out his growth from what he's shown last year in Basketball Africa League, also last summer at the Olympics, because he obviously plays for South Sudan, and South Sudan was in the Olympics and had a bit of a Cinderella run, actually. One of the most fun teams to watch in last year's Olympics. And he actually featured on that team as well. There is, if you really look at some of the older tape on him, there is like the ability potentially to see him like beyond as what he currently is for Duke, which is pretty limited offensively. You see him taking more jumpers. You see him sort of like pushing the break offensively. He has a handle. Like it's not terrible. Like it's not like the handle's so bad that it slows him down, for example. It allows him to sort of change into the court. It's still a pretty long way from like the most skilled players in the league, especially nowadays with the centers being so skilled. But there is tape of him where if you really want to be optimistic and you want to project like, okay, the stuff that he was doing a year ago versus this year in a more winning environment, how can you get like a 3-point shot from him? How can you get the ability to play off the post? There's actually a lot of videos of him taking like one-legged turnaround jumpers in the post, which certainly I think that's the superstar upside with him. But I would say the floor is pretty high. It's just like, for me, I know that he's going to be a really good rim protector. He's going to be mobile. He's not just going to be limited to, dropping into the paint. And I think, again, like, the other parts too, it's like, I think the scouting report, maybe in terms of just like who he is as a person, is really promising. There's actually a couple of videos out there. I mean, Duke does a really good job of promoting their prospects, and just, I guess, the storytelling element to the game. And there's videos out there where it's just like, I guess, they're doing interviews about how he's perceived by his teammates, the role that he plays on the team. And, obviously those things are always going to be positive, but I thought it was just really positive from all the interviews from like, his teammates, his coaches. Like, seems like a super genuine person, seems like a guy who brings great energy into the locker room each and every single day they go to work. Obviously a guy who's pretty, selfless, willing to play his role. I mean, he's mostly rebounding and setting screens and defending and stuff like that. So, certainly a guy who's willing to play his role. And I think when you hear him speak too, seems like a really smart, dedicated kid. Somebody who realizes how lucky he is to be in this position, realizes how blessed he is. And of course, like, he also just started playing basketball at 13. It's the classic story where he grew up playing soccer, which is pretty much everybody overseas. And realized his height, came to the sport later on. And yeah, I mean, basically he's been playing basketball since he's 13. Right now he's 18 or 19. So I think that there's like good potential there. So for me, that's probably the best fit that I would have. But if it's not Maluach, I feel like for another big that the Raptors could really use, Derek Queen is somebody who, has also been mentioned a lot. He's probably the second best center in this year's draft. Maybe would even argue he is the best center. That's him right there in 25 with the t-shirt on, with the long sleeves. I think I guess the deal with Derek Queen is just like, he is really smooth and skilled offensively for a big. Like, there is the balance that I think he strikes where he has both the power in his game, but also delicate feet and delicate touch, where he's able to, I guess, impose himself on the game in way more scenarios offensively. Like, obviously we're just picking random games here. This is Maryland versus Villanova. Last game, it was just Duke versus Illinois. So I wanted to show you more of one game in terms of the possessions rather than sort of like the overall highlight reel, because you can kind of cut together tape from like a whole season to make a player look like anything. I feel like within one game, it shows you at least a sense of like the stuff that they like to do. And right away, you can definitely tell that like Derek Queen is playing an entirely different game than what Kamal Maluach plays. Like, it's actually kind of amazing they're both playing center. But like, Derek Queen is very skilled offensively, a variety of moves. That's a very, very clever pass, just hooking it over his shoulder in a tight spot there. Didn't even lead to anything, but it was a really creative play. Nice little help side block, although that's called as a goaltend, but a nice effort on that front. But like, you can see that in this play, like, he's playing a lot of drop as a center, which Maluach does to some degree as well. But I think with Derek Queen, is more of a necessity. He's not like the quickest player out there. He's not the most dedicated defensive player either, I have to say. But on the offensive end, I think that's where you really see his value in terms of like his ability to back down defenders. I mean, that's ridiculous. That's a turnaround, one-legged Dirk fadeaway in the post. I don't even know necessarily why he needs to fade away in this scenario, but still, it looks cool as hell. But yeah, he just has like a really, really good sense of how to use his size, how to counter against when defenders are leaning on him. How to like right there, he drives into a spin and then, well, that's actually a bad shot. But ultimately he gets fouled on that kind of play. But it takes a lot of skill to sort of play the way he does. He's got a good handle too, which I really enjoy. Seeing big sort of change ends of the court. I think you'll probably see it in this run here, but there's a lot of sequences where he's like leading the break for his team, almost like it's a big. I mean, he's not. I would never say he's a point forward or point center, but also at the same time, like, he's a guy who, especially for Maryland, they played with two bigs, and so he's the power forward in a lot of these scenarios. It's almost like kind of like the early 2000s type of days where like you saw KG, for example, bring the ball up a lot. You saw like Chris Webber, for example, bring the ball up a lot. Like, that style of power forward, like, that's probably the way I would describe his offensive game. Now, of course, I'm not saying he's like going to be at that level. His, I guess, shorthand player comps are usually like, Zach Randolph, DeMarcus Cousins, basically just big-bodied centers who are skilled offensively. I could see a little bit of that, although I have to say that like a guy like Boogie Cousins, I mean, he was just like so quick, and had all the moves as well. I mean, I think it would be a stretch. I mean, Boogie has like arguably one of the most skilled center prospects of all time, just based on his skill set. I think what really didn't work out with Boogie was maybe his health and conditioning, and also obviously the attitude. Didn't help that he went to Sacramento as well, which is a terrible organization and always has been. But like, yeah, Derek Queen has that sort of ability to, run a lot of your offense for you. I think, especially thinking about how he would fit in Toronto, especially if I'm looking at that second unit where I would like to sort of hopefully improve on that group. What they're really missing is, number one, like that sort of like anchor for them on the offensive end that like Jakob does for the starters. It feels like when Jakob's in, he gives you that presence, that calm. When IQ drives and there's two defenders to drop off to Yak. Same thing with RJ. Scotty and Yak play a nice little pick and roll game, mostly interior passing. But like Yak provides that sort of stability where the offense can kind of go. If you look at the Raptors second unit, especially nowadays, like it's a lot of like Jamal Shed running pick and roll and then Jamal Shed taking the shot, or Jamal driving and kicking it out to a three. It's a little bit of Jacoby playing one-on-one, playing off of cuts, but like, for me, where the offense stagnates the most is probably like, the possessions where Mobo gets it. Now, I think Mobo offensively, certainly needs to find a role. I think the Raptors long-term see him as a wing. They've said that multiple times. And so I don't even think that he's like the future solution at backup center. I mean, certainly he's only 6'6", so it's not like he's like that big to actually play as a backup center long-term. But I think a guy like Queen, you can definitely see, especially with the way the Raptors want to initiate a lot of offense through the post. I feel like he actually would fit a lot of that. He has that passing ability, that scoring ability from a standstill. He could punish like mismatches and stuff like that. The big concern with him is defensively. He's 6'10", 7-foot wingspan, but he just doesn't necessarily seem that dedicated. I think there's a number of plays that we saw in this stretch here where, he's just not necessarily like defending at the highest level. I don't think that that's his focus, but for me, it's just the offensive ability for to be able to initiate and run a lot of actions and just quite frankly like finish in a variety of different scenarios. In some ways, you can think about it as like he's like the inverse. Like if Kamal Maluach is like the Mario, like he would be the Wario in this situation. Like they're literally virtual opposites in sort of how they play the game, their approach to the game, and everything like that. But at that point, for me, I would say that I would take Maluach over Derek Queen, just because I feel like I would rather bet on Maluach being able to, learn a couple of skills. Like let's say Maluach gets the ability to pull up, or not pull up, but just catch and shoot for three. Then I think there's like a path to like, why can't he be as good as like Brook Lopez, for example, right? I mean, he's bigger, more mobile than Brook was. Like that to me doesn't feel like that difficult, but I feel like for Derek Queen to actually learn how to be really effective defensively, especially as a center, is probably a longer term bet, and maybe a longer odds bet. So that's probably why I would prefer Maluach. But I think on the offensive end, it's not even close. Like obviously Derek Queen is, I mean, he's not just like the best, offensive center compared to Maluach, but I think he's just the best offensive center in this draft. And he's had a number of big moments as well. He had that game winner for Maryland in the tournament as well. So those are probably the two. And again, if the Raptors drafted anybody in their range of some sort of 7, 8, 9, I would prefer it to be a center. I just think that like, even though the Raptors, again, they will always tell you that they will draft best player available no matter what. I also think that like there is the best path for a player to get onto the court and get developmental minutes is at the center position. It doesn't crowd anybody out. The Raptors need a future center beyond Jakob. Not to say that it'll push Jakob out. I don't think that'll happen. But they just need some bigs in the pipeline. And I honestly, I'd be pretty happy with either of these two guys if they were to land for Toronto. But if I had my pick, I'd probably pick Maluach. Now, I want to look at some of the wings as well in this year's draft. I doubt a guy like Vijay Edgecombe really falls this low, where, we're looking at a guy who in certain mock drafts right now, you see him even as high as like 4. I think 4 is probably the highest we've seen him. I think the top 3, again, it's going to be Cooper, Ace, and Dylan. But I think with Vijay Edgecombe, I think what people are really looking at is just a guy who is a super athlete. Incredible. There's him right now shooting the ball for Baylor. As a freshman, I think he's done a really good job like fitting into what Baylor sort of needs. I think their identity as a team of late has really been to, be defense first, really lock down. I think he's really enthusiastic on that front as well. Certainly has like the profile, like at 6'3", really quick, explosive athlete. He sticks in front of people a lot, which I think is a really good sign. I think he's fit nicely into the system that Baylor plays in. Obviously, we actually had their head coach Drew Scott on the show last year to talk about the Raptors, who had drafted Jacoby Walter, who went to Baylor, and also added Davion Mitchell, who also was famously with Baylor, winning them the national championship. But I think VJ kind of fits in a lot of those senses in terms of he's more defense first. On the offensive end, this is one of those games where they're playing BYU, who also had quite a few good prospects on their team as well, but they're playing BYU, and BYU was largely in a zone. So this one, it really showcases ability to play make against the zone. A lot of that was catch and shoot threes, which you saw here today. You also saw a couple possessions where he's playmaking off the dribble. I think those are probably more rare. Right now, it seems like the majority of his offense is sort of catch and shoot threes, is the ability to, space it out and play within the flow of the game. I would say he's certainly a player who doesn't forces it that much. Even there, for example, he had the ball to start the possession, but then you see that, he works the pick and roll, realizes that there's not that much there. He kicks it out, resets, and then he relocates to the three. And he's able to knock down the outside shot. In this game, I think he had 28 points and he had 6 threes made. So he's a guy who doesn't force it. Now, I think maybe the detractors would say that, like, where is the path for him to potentially be that sort of lead guard for you? I've seen some comparisons, for example, to a guy like Victor Oladipo, who maybe similar measurables, also a guy who was like 6'2", 6'3", but like super athletic. I think with Victor, the difference there is that, like, even when he was with Orlando, and of course he was the second overall pick to Orlando back in the day, it just felt like he could create, but also at the same time, there was like no help around him. And Orlando has basically just been a very static offense over the years, and it still remains true to this day. But I think where it really popped was like when he went to go play with better players, more scoring capable players, obviously better bigs as well. I think that's super important for a guard. But I mean, at that point, he had both Sabonis and he had both Miles Turner, both of those guys, and that's where he really popped off. Victor did in Indiana and really took over and made the All-Star team and stuff like that. I think that's probably like the top end outcome for a guy like VJ. But I think for me, it's just like, I don't necessarily see the offensive creation that would probably separate him and probably justify and probably feel really you would feel great about getting him at 4 if you had that ability for him to sort of shot create and create for himself. But also at the same time, like, I don't necessarily mind the floor here. I think he's, like, for me, probably the best athlete in the draft in terms of just like maybe pound for pound. He's not particularly big, he's 6'2", 6'3", with like a 6'5", 6'6" wingspan. He's like really light on his feet. He's like pretty strong for his frame. Like, I thought they did a good job there cutting off Jaeger Demon, who is probably going to be another first round pick that we discuss here. But like, yeah, I mean, I would feel a lot better about this if he was able to showcase more of his like, I guess, individual shot creation. You know what I mean? If like you compare for a guy like Jacoby, who, if the Raptors were to draft VJ, he would be in direct competition with a guy like Jacoby. I feel like with VJ, even though he's averaging basically the same number of points as Jacoby are, like they think they're both averaging like 15. Jacoby averaged 15 for Baylor last year. That's what VJ's averaging for them this year, or he did. I feel like the difference feels like to me that like Jacoby initiated a lot more of his offense. He was able to draw fouls. He has that creativity that we've seen here with the Raptors in his rookie year, where he's able to use up fakes and sort of delay his timing and sort of how he's going to go up. And he draws a lot of fakes and fouls that way. I don't necessarily see that same dexterity and sort of like watching some of the VJ Edgecombe possessions where he's able to sort of generate as much his own offense. He doesn't force it. So sometimes he can be kind of like a passenger in a game. Like, it wouldn't be that crazy if he finished the game, for example, with like, 5-10 points. Like, it would be disappointing, but like, it wouldn't be necessarily that much of an outlier. But for me, it's like, how much do you believe in the 3-point shot? I think over the course of the season, he's really improved on that front. So that's been really promising. And then I think it's just athleticism in the open court. You don't see it as much in this game, but he's a crazy athlete, man. We're talking about like takeoff from like basically a step inside the free throw line and dunk it with 2 hands type of player. And I think a lot of the optimism with him too is like, okay, so that's like a college setting. And of course, like, we know the college game and the NBA game is pretty different. But like, we've seen him last year. He played for the Bahamas. And And the Bahamas actually tried to make their way into the Olympics last year through the Olympic qualifying tournament, and ultimately didn't make it. I think Spain ultimately made it out their group. But like he played on the team with Buddy Hield, with Eric Gordon, and with DeAndre Ayton. And VJ actually did not look out of place. In fact, in a lot of games, like VJ actually led them in scoring. That's when it was really eye-popping to see his ability, especially as an 18-year-old, to play against full-grown men. That to me was really impressive. I think, especially when you had more talent around him, when there was more space on the court, where, the more space you have, the less sort of like, you don't have to use as much skill to get past your guy because you're working with just more space. And I feel like his athleticism on that front, he was able to sort of use screens and explode and stuff like that. But for me, more than anything else, it's just like, if I feel really confident in his ability to create his own offense, to break down half court defenses, that's for me. I'm like, okay, there's a no brainer. We should take VJ Edgecombe. But I also think that there's also a realistic outcome where he's like a very athletic 3-and-D guy. And in that sense, it's like, it's a little bit less exciting, especially if you're sort of looking at him in the 4 kind of range. But again, like a guy who would, really, really fit almost any team that he goes to, because who would not be able to use a super athletic 3-and-D guy? The question for me then becomes like, it's the same thing with a guy like the next guy here, Trey Johnson. I really like watching Trey. I think that there is certainly again, a very different skill set as compared to a guy like VJ. Trey Johnson, as you can see here in this clip, this guy is creating a lot of his own offense. I mean, the way that he played for Texas was pretty similar to the way that he played in high school as well, which got him as an All-American. He is a guy who likes to create his offense, and he knows how to create his offense. He, especially at the college level, even as a freshman, was a 3-level scorer. You could probably debate what else he does besides scoring, but then again, it is the hardest part of the game, and it is the most important part of the game. And certainly he's a guy who can really do it. I mean, he's a guy who's like 6'6", 6'7", as a bigger guard. And I was actually watching an interview that he did recently, and he actually talked about if he could have the ball in one place on the court, he actually prefers having it in the post, which I think is really cool. I think that, you see a lot of star players initiate their offense through the post. But yeah, I mean, like, he's a guy who reminds me a little bit of Joe Johnson. And the reason I picked Joe Johnson was, as a bigger 2 guard, I always felt like Joe Johnson certainly was a very efficient 3-point shooter, especially in the Phoenix days. I mean, he was shooting like 40+%, like pretty easily, playing with Steve Nash. But I also felt like Joe Johnson could give you a lot of threes, and he could put those up. But he had a diversified game where Joe would go in the post, would play ISO, kind of a lot like what Trey Johnson does for Texas. And then I think what I really liked about Joe's game was the ability to sort of like play through contact. Like, Joe Johnson had a lot of size, and so he could play a lot through the post where he's able to bump and get to his spots and then rise up, draw fouls and stuff like that. Like, I know Joe Johnson, maybe ultimately, like, the resume doesn't look that great. Like, he's not going to be a Hall of Famer or anything like that, but he's still an all-star level player, a guy who can really create his own offense, and he also made a ton of money in his career. So I don't think it would be a bad outcome at all for Trey if he was able to sort of like play and have a similar career to Joe Johnson. In that same interview that I watched, he also talked about the players that he sort of like tries to emulate. And, he talked about Devin Booker. He talked about Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. When he was younger, he certainly wanted to play like KD because he was taller than everyone else, and he could obviously shoot and pull up over everybody. Maybe that's probably why he plays for Texas here as well. But like, yeah, I mean, I could see a little bit of that for sure. But I also see that like there's probably some comps I've seen him, for example, comparing him to a guy like Malik Monk, for example. I don't really think that he's like a Malik Monk type. Malik also had like crazy athleticism and quickness. In addition to sort of like the pull-up shooting. I feel like Malik doesn't necessarily play with as much physicality as a guy like Trey Johnson does, but this guy's just like a pure bucket. I think that's kind of the easiest way to describe him. The secondary skill is probably where I would be questioning, whether is he going to, play make for you? Is he going to be a guy who defends for you? I think those things are basically like not what he's shown yet in his young career, and not what he was asked to do that much of in Texas. Certainly he can play make in terms of like handling the ball and getting to a shot, but is this, for a guy who used a lot of possessions, didn't really average a lot of assists. I think it was in the 2s in terms of assists. But again, like, it's hard to compare that because, quite frankly, you just don't know, number one, like, what are the quality of his teammates? What's the coach telling him to do in a lot of these scenarios? I think for me, it's like, especially with the skill set that he has, like calling your own number makes a lot of sense. And you can see him beating the defense a lot, basically just on his own in a lot of these clips. And I think it really does show you a good idea of sort of like what type of player he is. When I pull up my notes on Trey, I mean, like he averaged 20 points per game. He shot 40% on 7 threes a game. He shot 4 free throws a game as well, and shot them at 87%. So like super efficient player. But yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's just like it's really just about what's a secondary skill, because I think a lot of these type of players ultimately end up kind of as six men. If they don't develop that secondary skill, whether that's sort of like defensively, he's able to really guard his position or be a positive on that end, or the playmaking element to sort of like run your offense. Because otherwise, he's kind of just like a classic two guard, maybe like classic in the sense of like you saw a lot more of this style of player in like 2010s than you do nowadays. I feel like a lot of two guards are now just catch and shoot guys. He's obviously a little bit more skilled than just that. I mean, for example, if he were to come to Toronto and he'd be competing with a guy like Grady Dick, I think it's very different, very, very different, right? Like Trey Johnson, you can see here, attacks off the dribble a lot, attacks off of, turnaround jumpers, attacks off the post. He plays through contact in a way that like Grady doesn't necessarily do. Grady is largely off ball, cutting, using screens, and then shooting, or if he's driving to the rim, like slipping through and trying to like, I guess, reach around the contact in a lot of sort of these scenarios. It's just not the same sort of like style of player. But ultimately, I don't mind this. I think that like there's a real case to be made that he is like okay, I'm taking Cooper out of all these conversations because I feel like Cooper is like the answer for like who's the best athlete, who's the best scorer, who's the best defender, who's the best competitor, whatever, blah blah blah. We take him out because obviously he's the number one here. But like outside of him, like there's a real chance that Trey Johnson is just like the best scorer in this draft. You know what I mean? Like I think that obviously Dylan Harper can score. Obviously Ace Bailey has similar highlights in terms of like he probably has even more difficult makes than a guy like Trey does, but like there is a really potent scoring skill set here because he looks very polished and very complete for a guy who is a freshman, and he's got the size to sort of do it. So especially on the Raptors team that really lacks scoring and really lacks shot making, I think that like especially maybe not as a rookie, but maybe going forward, like you could definitely see how Trey would fit in a lot of what the Raptors do. Looking at the guards in particular, is what I guess VJ and Trey, like it does raise the question of like, what do you actually do at the shooting guard position, or basically how much is too many shooting guards? Because the Raptors have drafted shooting guards in the last 2 drafts here, with Grady in 2023, and then with Jacoby Walter in last year's draft. They also added Ochai Agbaji during that stretch, and Ochai has shown probably the highest floor out of all 3 of those guys in terms of he's a pretty dependable 3-and-D guy now. It does raise a question to me in terms of like, are the Raptors just a little bit too small? You know what I mean? Like if they were to draft one of these 2 guys, like, and you will try to find minutes in the rotation, like one of them will probably have to play power forward in some of these matchups and lineups, and whatever. Like maybe the Raptors can just pivot to being like an all-out offensive team and sort of ignore and punt the defensive end and really have a surplus of shooters and guys who can create. Certainly that'd be a pretty big departure to where they were a couple years ago when there was Vision 6-9. This would be like the opposite of that, but it does create like a positional logjam, and that's where for me it's like you can draft best player available, but you also have to look at your team build, because a lot of these players are young and they're going to share the court together and they're going to be fighting each other for playing time, and it probably ultimately means that guys will be crowded out eventually. You know what I mean? Like if you were to draft one of these guys, like you would probably have in the back of your mind think ahead to like, okay, Grady Dick, who we've invested a lot of the development into, are we going to extend him, and what level is he going to showcase? Because otherwise we probably could trade him as well, because now all of a sudden we have so much depth at the same position. So it is a thing to wonder about, and maybe I'm curious to hear your thoughts as well in terms of like, do you think the Raptors have the budget to even fit another guard into what they're currently doing? But ultimately, that will be for them to decide a little bit later on. In terms of actual point guards in the Raptors range, I want to look at Kasparis Yakachonis here. I think that there's probably a debate for me. Obviously, Dylan Harper is the best point guard in this draft, and that's going to be the guy that people are going to largely look at. If you had any pick a point guard in this draft, I think Dylan Harper is the best point guard in this draft. But the next tier down is probably between Kasparis Yakachonis or Jeremiah Fears. We'll look at Fears in a different time, in a different video. I think he's a really interesting prospect, mostly because he's so young. Like he reclassified to be in this draft class, and he ran so much of the offense for Oklahoma. Like his usage was super high, and He has like crazy athleticism, and it's a very different style of player from Kasparis. But Kasparis was a guy who, and I'll run the tape here. He's a guy who got a lot of attention at the start of the year. Like I think I saw him as high as like 4 or 5. Certainly mock drafts and stuff like that will fluctuate and change, but I think it really reflects on the way he took the NCAA scene by storm as a freshman, especially at the start of the season. He's a guy who, played overseas, obviously, was born overseas. He's Lithuanian. He's from Vilnius, the capital city. Obviously, Lithuania is a huge basketball country in the first place. But yeah, he played for Barcelona's team, their B team, and then decided to continue his development here in college at Illinois. Him and Will Riley, who is the best Canadian in this draft, were the two guys that really stood out from Illinois. I think with Kasparis, like what's interesting about him is that he's a bigger guard, so he's like 6'5", and he's a guy who, for me, he primarily plays off of his ability to shoot the three. There's a lot of tape of him just like being at the 3-point line, driving up the 3-point line, getting screens, and then reading what the defense does. From there, there's a lot of attention paid to a 3-point shot. Like if you remember back to when we watched the Maluach film, like the first play of the game, they literally hard trapped him at half court. So they were really, really worried about his 3-point shot. You can see here, most defenses will show at the 3-point line to deny the pull-up three. But when he's one-on-one and stuff like that, he does a lot of like driving to his left and then stepping back behind the 3-point line and taking a pull-up three. From there, that's probably like the biggest weapon that he offers. And in that sense, it's a very modern NBA style game because most players in the NBA, especially the guards now, rely on that threat to sort of like, pull up from three off a high screen, step back from three, maybe even go one-on-one and still shoot us three. Like that's probably like the main thing that he does. And I think that the rest of the game kind of flows off of that. Certainly he's a point guard as well, so you'll see a lot of clips of him playmaking and something like that. But it's really the way he bends the defense is primarily with the three. I guess the shot making, the separation at the rim isn't necessarily great. I feel like when he has to sort of finish through contact, when he has to finish in the paint, that becomes more difficult for him. It's not necessarily as much of a given. But ultimately, like that's stuff that can be corrected. I think he could probably still get a little bit stronger. He could still probably develop a little bit further in terms of like his physique and maybe his technique. And also, again, like the college game is just super tight. Like when I watch even some of this clip, the defense is just like constantly in the paint, and in a way that I feel like in the NBA it's a lot more spaced out. But ultimately, he's a lead guard. He is primarily a guy who's going to build off the pull-up three. And if you feel confident in his ability to hit pull-up threes, I think that's probably how the rest of his career is going to go. I think the reason he slid down in the mock drafts over the course of the year is because he sort of tailed off as the season is gone. Illinois has, started really well, and then they had a string of losses and stuff like that. I think he also suffered like a forearm injury or whatever. I mean, he largely played through it. But yeah, I've seen him like lower now. I think like he got maybe as high as like 4 or 5, and now you see him maybe in that range of like, even in like 10, 11, 12 range, depending on sort of like, again, how sort of teams have really evaluated a season. But I still think that there's like a lot of optimism for this style of player. I think, he plays like a lot of modern guards do nowadays in the NBA. I think that there's some comparisons, like people have compared him to, it's always like compare Europeans of other Europeans. So it's like, I've seen some Goran Dragic comparisons. I wouldn't necessarily say that. I think Goran has definitely been a guy who can, obviously not popular in Toronto, but like a guy who can, really get downhill. And that's probably for me, like the main thing that Goran did. Goran also being a lefty really changed things a lot. For sort of how defenses were able to guard him. Kasparis obviously is a right-handed player, more classic in that sense. Maybe stylistically, like, you can maybe see that like he's trying to play a little bit like a Dame Lillard, for example. Especially with how much his game builds off of the pull-up three. Again, I would really caution against that one because Dame not only was an incredible pull-up three-point shooting threat, like one of the best of all time, but especially in his younger years, could really get downhill and really explode to the basket and had that sort of a burst and separating ability to like lead an offense and quite frankly even come close to leading the league in scoring. I don't think Jakučionis has that. If anything, I'm actually pretty concerned about how he can play through contact and it being in the paint. But like, stylistically, he plays a lot like a lot of point guards in the league now, and I mean, you could even like use Quickly, for example, as a way. I mean, again, Quickly is a very different player. Quickly has that burst and separation, and he uses that floater a lot as a counter to sort of how he can finish at the rim. Obviously, you're not seeing Quickly dunk on people. You're not seeing Quickly play through contact a lot on the perimeter or at the basket. But again, it's somebody who can really primarily create and dominate from the 3-point line, and then sort of use that to sort of build off the rest of their game. I don't mind. I think that again, like this style of player, I can definitely see it working in the NBA. Defensively, he's just kind of like whatever. Probably have to hide him a little bit. He's definitely not going to be a plus defender. But there's a toughness to his game. I don't mind that. I again, like I think that if the Raptors were to add another point guard, there probably is another budget for that. I mean, like you have IQ, you have Jamal, but at the same time, especially if you have a guy who can maybe be an off guard for you, maybe catch and shoot a lot for three. I mean, he's done a decent amount of that, although he's actually been better at pull up 3-point shooting than catch and shoot 3-point shooting this year in college. But I mean, whatever. That could just be an aberration. He's only played like 30 something games. But yeah, like that's the style and idea of player with Kasparis. And I think that maybe if he can really work through the ability to finish at the rim, especially at the next level, it's a huge maybe, but it's a realistic chance that he develops counters. That's probably the path to him being a lead guard of the future. But, again, realistically in the Raptors range, Kasparis is certainly an option that they can use here. So those are probably the 5 guys I'm looking at probably the closest. Again, revisiting the draft range, the team is just most likely going to be picking, whether that's, they're most likely going to be just selecting 7, 8, or 9 based on sort of where the lottery odds are going to be. And so I wanted to look at players maybe in that range rather than sort of looking ahead to the very top and being like, how would Cooper Flag fit the Raptors? Like, obviously he'd be fit. You know what I mean? But still, those are probably the 5 guys I take a look at. Really quickly to close the show, I did want to take a closer look, and I wanted people to sort of like maybe at least put the idea of some of these other guys who, if they ultimately get picked, let's say the Raptors take 7th or 8th, like it probably does feel a little bit high for some of these guys. But I got like Con Knipple, who played at Duke. One of their very, very many excellent players that they had at Duke. I like his game a lot too. I think that it's not flashy, and that's probably the thing that's going to hurt him. He's number 7 there. You can see him. The guy, he's white. So he's defensively, you could definitely see some challenges in the next level. I would say that his defensive stats at Duke aren't bad. I saw a thread on Reddit. They have a draft Reddit thread, NBA draft, which I think is actually quite useful for discussions of like prospects and probably closer depth. But I saw someone present the idea that like his defensive stats from the season aren't actually that bad. Like in terms of defending drives, he's allowed 27% shooting field goal percentage on drives, which is really good. 30% field goal percentage on jumpers, 33% at the rim, and then 27% field goal percentage against guarding pick and roll. So like that's actually really good. Now, granted, like those numbers are really inflated because Duke is super good, and also Duke has had arguably the 2 best defenders in the entire country behind him, with Kamal Maluach protecting the rim, and also with Cooper Flag doing everything basically. And so there's a element of that. But I think, yeah, I mean, the case for Khan is just like, he's a really, really good 3-point shooter already. I mean, he's an overall really efficient player. Like he's on the season, he shot 48% from the field, 40% from 3, 91% from the foul line for a true shooting percentage of 64%. That is really, really good as a guard, especially as a freshman guard in the college level. He actually ran a lot of point for Duke. Duke didn't really necessarily have a natural point guard. He's certainly a little bit bigger. He's like 6'5", 6'6", 220. So he's not necessarily a point guard size either, but Duke didn't really have a traditional point guard that they really needed to play through this year. So they played a lot through Khan. They played a lot through Cooper, as sort of like bigger wings. But Khan was probably closest to like who actually would be nominally the point guard for them. And you actually saw him run a lot of pick and rolls and stuff like that. He was really, really efficient just playing within that system, catch and shoot for threes. I mean, he's got a really compact 3-point release. I think there's just like a really good sense of like, he looks really consistent. Like it's a really compact release. It's a really, like it looks like the same shot pretty much every single time. It doesn't really take him a lot to sort of get it off. Like he doesn't have to really jump really high and everything like that. Like it's just like a quick compact release. I think one thing, if you watch some of the clips too, like I'm going to run it again. But Like his hands are just always ready. Like he's always like calling for the ball, or his hands are just always ready. Some of these are drives, so whatever. Like we're not gonna see him actually, but like you'll just see like his hands are always just ready to shoot the ball, and I feel like he like has a good sense of how to play off ball. You know what I mean? Like he knows how to like reposition a little bit, get over a couple feet here or there just to create a better angle for how the kick out's going to come. And then he just prepares himself really well for shots. You'll see it come up eventually. And I think the other thing too is just like you never see him take that many dribbles. Like he's kind of like a guy who kind of takes 2 dribbles and really assesses where he's going to be, whether that's going to be in the mid range, whether that's going to be from 3. Like he's not using that many dribbles. Like he used 1 dribble there to get himself a little more separation against a big. We realized he probably just want to play at the 3-point line. He was able to just like step out and knock down the 3. So like for me, it's just like I could see an easy fit. He probably fits better on teams that like already have established stars and established systems, and you can just come in and sort of play off of them. But I could definitely see Khan being a contributor at the next level. Certainly, he's going to be picked on defensively. He's not athletic. He's not going to be a good finisher at the rim. I think he was in the 50s at the rim, which is pretty terrible overall, but can be a little bit of that secondary playmaking for you, and certainly can be a pretty reliable shooter. So I don't mind him. Again, it probably depends on where the Raptors. Like I wouldn't draft him if he was like the Raptors end up top 4. There's no way. But if he was available in that 9-8 range, I could see the case for making a swing on him. He's like a really high floor type of player who I think could really be in an NBA rotation next year. Very different from that is Yegor Demon, who I think he played at BYU this year, and he is a Russian point guard who also had some pub playing overseas. But I think at the start of the season, I remember we had Sam Massini on over at The Athletic, and Sam does a great job of covering the draft. And I think Sam even had him as high as like 3 in the draft, which, you know, I think right now there's no chance that he goes 3. But I can definitely see the vision in terms of like, that's the number 3 as the point guard there. He's a big point guard. Like he's like 6'8", 6'9", in that range. I think a lot of it really depends on whether or not he can knock down the 3, because, quite frankly, that's just how most point guards have to attack nowadays, is offer the threat from 3 and then sort of play make from there. The 3-point shot really comes and goes, so you would have to really buy it. But, you know, as a bigger point guard, you could definitely see the advantages of sort of him being able to see over the defense, him being able to play make, him being able to shoot over the top of a lot of players. And he does have a really nice collection of passes over the course of the season. Like if you really look at the types of passes he's able to throw, I think they're pretty good. I think where it becomes really raw is like he doesn't necessarily have like a lot of great moves, although that's a really nice step back. But like it's not like he's going to break a guy down on the perimeter. You know what I mean? Like he's probably going to need a screen, or he's probably going to need to shoot over the top. And so, you know, he's like, I guess he will touch the paint, but ultimately like it's, you know, it's not like a clear bet like he's going to like get into the paint as much as he wants. You know what I mean? Like that's probably the classic idea of like a 6'9", you know, playmaking wing, whether that's like a LeBron or like a, you know, Paul George even. Like I don't think he's nearly on that level at all. But I think that like you bet on the size, you bet on the playmaking. I see some people compare him to Josh Giddey. Quite frankly, I don't see it. Josh Giddey is like super physical driver, plays relentless in transition, and has a physicality to his game that I think a lot of Australians have. I think Yegor, when he gets met with physicality, probably wilts more than anything else. So maybe he gets stronger, maybe that changes. But for me, he will be more of like a perimeter type of guy. But I think there's an upside there. Again, we're talking about a 6'9" point guard, so you know, certainly there's an upside. And again, the reads as a passer are really nice too. So I think that will be kind of a return almost to like that Vision 6'9" style of play that the Raptors that we all loved a couple of seasons ago. And then lastly, wanted to show the Canadian a little bit of love, but Will Riley should also be somebody on your radar. Will Riley is a really fun player for me. Hold on, let me just make sure I have the right video. Yeah, Will Riley is really fun. Surprising that he came off the bench for most of the season for Illinois, but this is a guy who, friend of the program, Liban Osman, over at the Canadian Basketball Show, really put me on early in terms of just look out for him. I mean, he's like a 6'8", 6'9" player there. You see him guarding the ball. And yeah, I mean, he's kind of like your classic like perimeter player nowadays, especially from, that sort of like shooting guard, small forward position. He obviously be a really big shooting guard. Like he's like 6'8", 6'9" already. You can see he's like long and lanky. But he's a guy who can really make tough shots from the three. You see him a lot flying off of screens and taking pull-up threes, like certainly difficult ones, not catch and standstill threes. And he's got a bit of a handle as well. I mean, he's actually played a decent amount of point guard. That's a crazy 4-point play there. Should have been called. But like, yeah, I mean, big wing, big shot maker on the perimeter. I would say he probably, based on his size, probably could play more in the paint than he currently does. But also at the same time, you can see that he's a little bit skinny, kind of the shoulders are a little bit narrow. So I kind of understand if he doesn't always get to the basket as much as he wants to. And that's something maybe long term he fills out. But I can see definitely a guy like Will like rising up in the draft rankings. There's just not that many big playmaking wings. And those guys always go higher in the draft. I think right now maybe you will see him pop up in that like teens range. Like I don't know. Like I've even seen him like as low as like 20, for example. Like they're certainly seems a little bit of a reach for the Raptors to get him. But I think again the skill set is there. Like as a big shooter who can knock down deep threes. I mean a lot of these are NBA range threes. He's certainly not shy offensively. There's definitely a nice skill set there. Now, again, like he would probably need to fill out, he would need to grow, but you can see the bones and the frame of a really good player. Some of these plays, I mean, like obviously he gets a little over aggressive. That's pretty much a bad shot. I think maybe like MPJ. Like Michael Porter Jr., that style of player, the way that he plays for the Nuggets, like largely off ball, but catch and shoot, being tall, being big, high release point, hard for people to get out to. You see Will playing more on ball here than you will ever see Michael Porter Jr. play really for the Nuggets, but also at the same time the Nuggets have Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic, so you can definitely see that. I mean, as a Nuggets fan, I certainly wouldn't want to see anybody else play make for that team other than those two top guys, but. That style of player. And yeah, I mean, I think, if you're looking realistically, if the Raptors end up like 7, 8, 9, I don't mind a swing and a bet on someone like that. Someone who can be like a small forward for you, especially if you think he's going to fill out and get a little bit stronger. He's willing to defend. Like he's not willing to compete and defend right now. But I do think that's somebody where just getting stronger would really, really help on that front and make a big difference. And then offensively, just like a tough shot maker, occasionally a shot creator for you. And he's Canadian. He's born in Kitchener or stuff like that. So like there's that aspect as well. But more than anything else, I think it's his skill set. I actually really like Will. And I could definitely see him going at least in a lottery. I definitely see his stock rising. But those are kind of the guys I want to take a quick early look at. Again, we'll look at more of these guys in depth later on. I'm not going to pretend to be an expert in any of these things. These are just me taking the last week or so to just like take a look at what these guys do and how they will potentially fit on the Raptors. Like I said, I think that if I were the guy that, if I were like it look, if I were making a pick and the Raptors had somewhere in that sort of 7, 8, 9 range, I would definitely try to look at a center. I'd be pretty happy with both Maluach and Queen. I would definitely prefer Maluach in that sort of stretch. But ultimately, I want to hear your thoughts too. Who are the guys that really stood out to you? And out of these prospects and what you've seen so far, who are the guys you like? So we're actually going to bring in producer Jerome Chang, who I talk basketball with on a daily basis. Jerome, I know you're not that... What's up, man? I know you're not that tapped into college basketball. You've definitely watched more of the women's tournament than the men's side, for example, this year.
Yeah.
But based on the 8 guys I've shown you film on today, who do you like?
It feels like Maluach is the obvious pick. I mean, you came with him first, and I think even in the chat, the same thing is very much so. Maluach is the favorite in terms of like if we can get him, that's who we should go for. You know me, I am a sucker for a shot creator and someone with just like a bag. So watching Derek Queen highlights and definitely like the comps when you're talking like a Zach Randolph or a DeMarcus Cousins, I can't help but enjoy that and would want to see it on a team. And frankly, want to see it on a team where I feel that shot creation is an issue for us. Obviously, with Brandon Ingram coming in next season, that will be helpful, and therefore, and we may not actually like really worry as much about it at that point with him involved. But I think when you're going through a lot of like the guard positions that you mentioned, my concern for that is kind of, you mentioned it already, is just like how deep it is already. Like it feels like a lot of the people that we may add in at that position will kind of come into that pool of like deciding who are the guards that we want to move forward with.
Yep.
And like there's already at least a front office dedication to Grady Dick. It seems like we came off the season really loving Jamal Shed, and we haven't even gotten a chance to, really look at Jacoby, who seems to be coming up on it. Oshai Baji, for example, also in there. And we're not even like talking about our starting lineup.
That's what I'm saying. Like, yeah, like ultimately, yeah, none of these guys are going to beat out even RJ, for example, in the next 2-3 years.
Yeah. So I think to those ends, it is really interesting to see them involved. And again, like, at that position between like the 7 to 10, it's not like we can be so selective, just like finding the best talent might be like the right thing to do. Again, I think a big feels like what we should be leaning toward. Maluach makes the most sense. Actually, there are a couple of questions and comments we have in here that I'm going to pull in one for you, which I thought was kind of interesting. So what is the ceiling for a center in the draft of Maluach's skill set in a modern NBA?
I think a lot of that really depends on how he develops offensively. I think the floor is pretty good. Like, I think the mobility, the size. I mean, again, the size is ridiculous. Like, his standing reach is bigger than Wemby's. Like, I feel like for guys of that level, I don't even want them to jump as much.
Right.
Like, if you just stay ground bound, like, like a guy like Marc Gasol, for example, who, by the way, he's actually bigger than Mark, which is nuts.
That's crazy.
Which is already, yeah, exactly, right?
Yeah.
But, like, Mark never really jumped.
Right.
I mean, Mark wasn't like athletic enough to jump, and like he wasn't like, it's not like watching those old Hakeem or the Wilt highlights, but
Sure. And he also, like, to Mark's like, he was always in comparison to his brother, so he seemed like he had a more limited offensive set. Like, it was one that developed over time.
Yeah, I mean, look, if Maluach got even anywhere close to how skilled Mark is, then we're talking about like a future Hall of Famer here. But
sure, of course.
I think what with Maluach is just like, defensively, maybe the only thing I will want to see him do is just get the legs stronger. It does feel like if he gets posted up, for example, it feels like guys are able to sort of like, I guess, like wedge and get an angle around. Like you and I play a lot of one-on-one, and I'm bigger than you, but like that if you get me under the basket and you can pivot and sort of like just find an angle to sort of rise up and separate. Like, I think that there's that element where he probably struggles just like cutting off all those angles by being strong. You know what I mean? Like, you don't have to play perfect defense.
It seems like
you're
he has
just
the
like
agility too, though. Like, the mobility seems to be there. Which
right, and that's the thing. Like, I don't want him to bulk up like what the Raptors did with JV, for example, where like he was like really quick and really like I guess like slim. Like, they were comparing him to like Joakim Noah, and then he like became more like a Roy Hibbert type, which is crazy because like I would much rather have Joakim Noah than Roy Hibbert. So I don't want him to get him like big, but at the same time, like it feels like his upper body's grown a lot since like last year. And then I think I want to see just him get stronger with the base, because for a guy that big, I don't even want to see him jumping that much. Like, he will just contest shots almost naturally by virtue of sort of his size. There's also the other finer points of his game, like screening. I think sometimes you see his hands down, which again, like, it's just got to get in the habit of having your hands up all the time. Like, when he does that, he just closes off so much of the court. And then on the offensive end, like, the way he played for Duke was a role, and he was very effective in that role. He's a role man.
I
He's
think
like
that's the tough part when it comes to
like Clint Capella
assessing.
style of like of a big, but at the same time, I think that the question is, can you develop more of that? I think the one thing that's promising with him is like his free throw shooting is actually pretty good. I think it's like 77%.
You had mentioned that before, yeah. And
the touch
I think
is there.
having those mechanics is good.
Yeah, like it's not like he doesn't have any touch, but I think that like similar to a lot of bigs, like if you like the guy like Derek Queen, for example, like he's just like has so much more like size, like fluidity and like comfort in playing offense, right? Like you see when he plays offense, it's like he's
a hooper.
He's a hooper. Like he'll drive, he'll cross over, he'll change angles. He knows how to like turn the guy's momentum against him. If they're leaning him one way, he knows how to spin off of that. He knows sort of how to counter that. He knows when he can bully ball. Like like that's a ball don't stop hooper. You know what I
Sure.
mean? Maluach is not
there's
ever going to
like
be a ball don't stop hooper. Like,
it's
but
a bit of a reach when it with Derek just because of all the defensive concerns, but for his skill set and what appears to be his IQ, like you do see players of similar type being like it sounds like it might be more of effort than it is like him not knowing what to do. It feels like he's smart enough and skilled enough to be able to do the right things on defense, so it's just a matter of like maybe being put in a system to put in the effort.
the question there, I think, is like because maybe you play him as a 4 rather than playing him as a 5.
Right. I saw he's listed as 6'9", so he's not even that big.
No, he's not that big. He's like big
Yeah.
body and stuff like that, but he's like
Sure.
6'9", 6'10". He got the T-shirt on, which always makes you look bigger. But like, yeah, shouts to chubby hoopers everywhere hooping in T-shirts. That includes me.
Likewise.
But like, I think with him, like, if he were to play power forward, I think the major question is just can he get the outside shot to drop? Like, he's not really a 3-point shooter. He can
in
certainly
the
hit
modern
mid range
NBA,
and
he
stuff.
would need to, right? So
Yeah. Like, he can hit mid ranges and stuff like that, but I don't think it's the best use of his skill set to sort of just like pop him behind the 3-point line. No one's going to guard him there, or he's not the most effective there. But man, I don't know, man. Derek Queen is also really fun. Like, I've maybe seen like comparisons to like Nas Reed. Now, Nas is certainly a guy who can really pop from 3, so it's like a different. But like when he drives and stuff like that, the fluidity and terms of like want to hit a spin move and the balance and the light feet, it's like that's like miles ahead of like a Maluach, for example.
also
So
one of
it's
those
really
things,
depending
too,
on
where
what
it's
style
like-
player you like.
what about Derek Queen that you've seen doesn't say he can't add a 3?
That's the thing. I actually
Yeah.
think that like he has already demonstrated like the ability to like shoot from mid range, and it's just like extending that. I think this difficult thing for bigs, especially because like they shoot flat footed, like they don't jump in those shots, and so I think it's harder to add range on those because when you're shooting flat footed, you're almost always shooting a flatter shot because you're not jumping.
Right.
And so unless you're like Dirk with that like crazy release of Dirk's, like you're not going to be able to get the range on just like those flat-footed shots. But I think that's where I mean, if Queen could shoot the 3, I mean, he'd be a top 5 prospect, like no problem. Yeah.
And I guess the other thing too, at least like with how we're presently constructed, there's something about obviously he's like scoring leaning, but I do wonder in some ways with how he plays and how much he needs to have the ball, if that's kind of a redundancy besides Scotty.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's fair. Those are all long-term questions to ask. I mean, it's weird because you look at the Raptors and you're like, you run into all these like redundancies on the roster.
Right.
But it's like, but the roster is also going to win 30 games this year. So it's okay if we have redundancies. You know?
That's the interesting part. I think like because of coming off this like tanking season and the expectation to compete as early as next season, we do forget about like how much better we can actually be. Like I think we are obviously are constructed better than what our record says, but I also think like even with whoever we add to this roster, there isn't like necessarily job security at any particular position outside of like maybe 2 players, 3 players on the team. So I think
3's generous.
3's generous. There you go.
Two's a good number.
2's a good number. The other thing too, just like in all of this, I know he's really early on, but like where does Chomche fit in all this? Like, is it just that his development would be still behind even whoever we draft in here?
Interesting with Shamshe. He actually was roommates and played on the same team with Kamal Maluach at the Basketball Africa Academy. So if you watch Ulrich Shamshe's like NBA documentary that they put together with his backstory, which is really, really cool. He takes you to like his village where he grew up. You know, there's like video of him like hacking down like bananas and stuff. It's crazy, like to think that he's in the NBA now, and how far he's come. But like, he takes you back to like, I mean, they were coached by the same guy, they were scouted by the same guy.
Everything about Maluach says like he is the ideal Raptors pick. Like
no, I mean, no, seriously, like fit wise, like style wise, I think that like this is the type of player that
it's exactly a Raptors type of player.
So they actually played a lot together as like a 4-5 combination. Shamshe was the 4 and Ulrich was the 5. Now, granted, that's like a much lower league, all due respect, versus like NBA or even NCAA. But I think that's sort of like maybe the idea there. Shamshe is like closer to 6'10", like he's not 7 foot. Like I think like Maluach is noticeably larger than him. Offensively, I wouldn't say that. I mean, like, you can get away with being a center with either of their skill sets because you're largely rolling to the basket and dunking and maybe doing little jump hooks. But I don't think either of them have the skill set to play four at all. So I don't think that like long term they should really play that much together, especially if you want to run a decent offense. The shot blocking on that would be crazy though. Like Ulrich is already a really good shot blocker, and Maluach is again standing reach, same as Wemby. But yeah, offensively it'll be a real struggle. But I also think that the Raptors kind of like the way to look at Shamshay is like the way the Raptors drafted and then stashed him in the G League and signed him to a multi-year deal is kind of like instead of Ulrich Shamshay going to some college right now and playing NCAA basketball,
or even
his
going
version
somewhere
of
abroad to play professionally.
Yeah, his version is like, some people who graduate from high school and they go straight to do an internship. You know what I mean? Like that's kind of what he's doing right now. So I would look at it on that sort of sense. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm actually really curious to see how Ulrich will look maybe at Summer League, for example, to sort of evaluate his progress. But I don't think that should preclude us from getting another center.
Of course, yeah. I mean, this comment here from Coach Roach, who's been very active and like offering a lot of good insight in the chat throughout the show.
Okay.
We have not had a backup center in 5 years. Like, I think just the idea that we just need bigs.
Well, I mean, we the number of backup bigs that we've had over the years,
right?
Since we had like, Kyle, obviously Mark and Serge, which was like the golden era of the Raptors having bigs, but like the bigs that we've had then are like Aaron Baines, Alex Len.
Right.
We played some Chris Boucher at center, which he's not a center. We used to play Pascal and OG at center, which is nuts as well. We played some Scotty at center in like actual playoff games. We did that, which is nuts. Like we had him guarding Embiid. That's how he got injured. Right. We had we had Christian Coloco, who unfortunately was not able to play due to health issues. Precious Achiuwa, we played him at center. He's 6'9", 6'8", 6'9", not a center. More recently, we had guys like Malik Williams play at center. Jonte Porter played at center for us, which was actually not bad, but ultimately really bad.
Right. For other reasons. Yeah.
For non-basketball reasons.
Non-court reasons, yeah.
And then, even this year, like we had Bruno Fernando and Orlando Robinson now, Colin Castleton, We Be Ballin', shouts to Colin. Colin Gillespie here in the chat, who can forget his infamous Party in the USA video, which I think the Raptors had to take down for copyright issues.
Sure. Yeah, well, I mean, like, even when you think about a Yak Aperto who has
become, and then Yak, of course, yeah.
Yeah, but, like, Yak, for all we thought going into the season, was going to be someone that we would eventually deal, and now has become so, like, the person who's become too good at their job. Like, they're so essential for us until we can actually, like, start building some depth.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think even Bobby was asked about this at the trade deadline, and he even admitted that backup center was like a real point of weakness for the team.
Sure.
So
I think like in terms of like talking through it, that's really just been the focus. Like we need bigs. That's where we lack the depth, and Maluach seems to be the favorite. Although I don't think any of us would be like particularly mad if we can't get him and we end up with Derek Queen. One name that has been floating around in the chat, so I'm just going to put it up here. What do you think about Danny Wolf? If you have,
I mean, it's a totally different prospect because like pretty much everybody that I've talked about here are guys who are like, they're like freshmen. Like, that's like typically the style of player that you would look at. A lot of these guys are like born in 2006, which is kind of freaking me out almost.
Right.
Danny Wolf, obviously an older player. He's a junior. I guess really unique in the sense like he can shoot the three. He can play make from the top of the floor. He actually runs a lot of offense for Michigan. Kind of the top of the floor there. I mean, I just wouldn't look at it with my. I don't think you tank for like half the season and then you were like, all right, I'm walking away with Danny Wolf. Like I just feel like that would be.
Sure.
Like there's just not enough upside on that front. I feel like he could probably be gotten maybe with a second round pick, maybe even.
So it's you would say like it's not just too high of a pick to use on a Danny Wolf.
Yeah, but I like the style of player that he is.
Sure.
Maybe defensively have some concerns and stuff like that, but I mean 7-footer, big body, you see, honestly, there's this style of players coming back. I mean, especially if you're big and you can shoot the three, it really does give you a lot of optionality. Not that he's similar to Quentin Post, for example, but like,
Right.
because they're just pretty different. But
Quentin Post, who we just learned of quite recently.
yeah, there's a real moment where it's like me and Jerome were at the Airbnb in Atlanta, and we're like, all right, what are we gonna do? Let's just turn on League Pass, and then we're watching I think Warriors were playing the Rockets.
Was
and
it
we're
the
like,
Rockets
who the
game?
hell is
Okay,
this?
Yeah. Yeah.
So shouts to Quentin Post, but
Shouts to Quentin Post.
if you're a 7-footer, you can shoot the three. Like it gives you a lot of avenues to be on the floor. Sometimes you can play as a 4, sometimes you can play as a 5. But yeah, Danny West's a nice player. I really, but you just can't drop him this high. You just can't. I mean, it's yeah.
All right. I think that covers everything for now, which is a good little preamble because we're going to talk about this for the next couple of weeks to months.
We will have so much more.
We will have so much more
on all these guys. Also,
you know,
we will have draft experts on the show too. That's the
and
thing.
we will
this is
have-
just
yeah.
me watching the games, watching some of the highlights, and giving you my thoughts. But obviously, that's nowhere close to people who actually do this for a living.
For sure. Yeah, a little background. Like we were trying to get in a guest this week, but understandably with March Madness going on, it was hard to schedule in. But you know, we've had Sam Vicini on the show before. We'll probably have him again, amongst others. Like we definitely will aim to do that with our coverage. But before we close out, I think we should go to an announcement from one of our other sponsors and talk a little bit about that after the break. So we're going to go to that right now.
Hitting your goals should not be this complicated. It should be as simple as banking with Tangerine. Take your shot at the Tangerine layup for a chance to win one of 150 pairs of Raptors tickets. Tangerine, the official bank of the Toronto Raptors and their fans.
All right.
All right. Free Raptors tickets.
Free
Hell
Raptors tickets. Yeah, so we've been teasing this a little bit on the last Reactin' leading up, but this weekend over at Stacked Market, Tangerine is running an event. I think both days from 12 to 4. They're going to have, I believe, like the Dance Packs or the Northside crew is going to be there. Some alumni, definite personalities. I'm sure the Raptors is going to be there too. But they're running an event where there's going to be, I think, a 25-foot tall rim or net to shoot on and also a shorter one. And I think part of the contest is there are a lot of Raptors tickets to give away. And we have a couple ourselves that we're going to give away as well.
Yeah, so obviously Tangerine, you know them as one of our partners here on the Hello and Welcome podcast. And I think when we heard that Tangerine is going to put on this event, we're really excited. I mean, obviously we'll actually be there on Sunday, April the 6th. I think the three of us, is Alex going to come back for that one or no?
Alex is still in Montreal, I think. He's
Okay.
on his way back. So
All right.
you and I will definitely be there. We're probably going to be the ones, if you need to find us, trying to make a bucket on that 25-foot hoop.
I mean, 25 sounds kind of nuts. I actually don't
Yeah.
even know how you would physically throw that up there. Maybe you can kick the ball up there or something.
I
But
wonder how tall the one, because over at All-Star NBA, it's not courtside, but you know the NBA event that they have going on over there, they sometimes did have like a super tall rim, and I
Okay.
don't know how tall it was. I feel like I've hit that one before. But
Okay.
We'll see.
well, I mean, you know, the two of us, we're definitely going to try to hit a shot if we see a rim. So that'll be really fun. But yeah, especially when we heard there was 150 pairs of tickets to give away from Tangerine, we were like really excited. And our first thought was like, how do we actually get a couple tickets for listeners of the show? Because we want to say a huge appreciation for people who have been listening all year. And so we reached out to Tangerine. They actually gave us 3 pairs of tickets to hand out on our show as well.
Yep.
And so these tickets will actually be for the last home game of the season. The Raptors play the Hornets at 7:30 p.m. at Scotiabank Arena. That will be April the 9th. And so we've secured 3 pairs of tickets, courtesy of Tangerine. And this is what you need to do to enter into the draw to get these tickets. You're going to need to do 3 things. Number 1, I want you to take a screenshot of you following at Tangerine Bank on Instagram. Number 2, I want you to take a screenshot of your 5-star review of a Hello Welcome podcast on Apple Podcasts. It's really easy to do. Just open your podcast app, find our show, and then write a review. And again, 5 stars, please. Thank you. And then I want you to send the 2 screenshots of these things to the email that we're going to list here. It's info at hellowelcome.show. We'll put those into the live chat as well. But for people listening, we'll be doing a draw, I guess, this weekend. and we'll find a way. But we'll distribute
I think we're
3 pairs
we're
of
gonna
tickets.
talk about this contest a couple of times throughout the week through our various React podcasts, and I think we'll do a draw. Let's aim for by the end of the weekend because the event is this weekend.
Well, I mean, the game's next week, so.
And the game's next week. So, I mean, definitely keep that date open in case you win. And also, we'll put this information, we'll try to put it in the chat. We'll definitely put it in the description for the show. And, I mean, get involved. And then, like we said, we're going to be there on Sunday. We'll have to leave a bit earlier because there's apparently... Raptors Nets at 3:30. So we're gonna have to go back and watch that
again.
I swear, some of these teams that we've been playing, like, if you told me we played like the Philadelphia 76ers 12 times this year, I would believe that.
Goodness.
But anyway, no, we'll be there. We'll aim to be there during the day. Come say hello. Come check out the activation. And everything that Will said. Enter the contest for a chance to win one of 3 pairs of tickets.
Yeah. Hold on, I'm gonna put it into the chat here.
Thank you very much.
IG to leave 5-star review on Apple Podcast. 3 email info@hello welcome.show.
Yeah.
Done.
And how about we say, to be fair, if people don't have Instagram, which seems unlikely, but if they don't, follow them on Twitter. Can we accept that as a
Yeah,
screenshot?
sure. Yeah, of course.
Follow them on Twitter, also at Tangerine Bank. But any one of those, hopefully you have one of those platforms. TikTok they also have as well. But let's aim for Instagram or X, formerly known as Twitter, and we'll see how many people can get on. And it'll be really fun.
Don't you guys want to see Raptors Hornets, guys? Come on, man.
I mean, Will's going to be there. I think what would happen, too, is, say hi to Will, because it'll be his final home game of the season. Who knows? Maybe we'll try to get ourselves, like, the 3 of us there. Just see if we can get, like, one time.
Man.
All of us over. But, we'll see what's up.
Man, you guys don't want to watch Yusuf Nurkic?
No, wait, that's where he is now?
Yeah, he's with the Hornets.
Oh, my goodness.
I know. Where in the world is Yusuf Nurkic? It's always actually really fun. The Raptors do a great job, regardless of how the season's going. They always do a great job in the last game of the year.
Yes.
For fan appreciation as well. So they give away a lot of extra stuff as well. But we'll look forward to seeing you there. And of course, if you don't win the tickets through the show, you can also secure one of 150 pairs of tickets that Tangerine is giving away this weekend at Stacked Market. If you don't know, that's where's Stacked Market? It's on Bathurst, just south of King.
Near Front Street.
Yeah, near front.
Bathurst
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a great time. Come out, meet the Raptor, take some photos, and have just a good time with the activations. And of course, we'll be there on Sunday as well. So that's pretty much it. Let us know which prospects you guys like as well. Hit us up on that
DJ
front.
DJ Four Corners coming through too.
We got DJ Four Corners. Oh man, when they say former Raptors alumni, do they mean probably Jamal McGlure? Seen Jamal a lot recently.
Have you seen Jamal a lot? Yeah, I wonder who. There were a couple names that were floating around that we were told, but obviously we don't want to overpromise on that front because we're not 100% sure. But yeah, should be some alumni. The Raptor will be there. Northside Crew will be there, and of course we will be there as well on Sunday.
Yeah. There you go. So we'll see you then. Otherwise, we will see you when we go live tomorrow after the game. We'll also remind you the contest then as well. There's no rush, by the way, to be the first people to do it. It's not like the first 3 people to email us.
It will be a random draw. Yeah.
We'll draw at the end of the week. But we appreciate all of you guys for listening. Let us know what you thought of the prospects we talked here tonight, and who you're following and who you would potentially like to see in the Raptors range. And of course, big thanks to everyone for listening. So this has been the Hello and Welcome podcast.
Just one
what's up?
additional note. Some people don't use Apple Podcasts. Does a Spotify review work? Yeah. 5-star Spotify.
We have like 1,000 Spotify reviews. Not that we don't appreciate it, but we just want to bump up that.
I mean, you an Android user.
I mean, I have a MacBook.
Oh my goodness.
Although, unlike Alex, I have not written a review for my own show. Okay, come on, man.
Yeah.
Somewhere in our Apple reviews is Alex writing a review being like, great show. Love these guys. They're so funny. So, yeah. So,
right.
anyway, Wow, Will hating on us real hits, guys. Come on, please. Fine. Leave a Spotify review too. It's cool. We
use
appreciate any
Anchor
sort of
as well.
review we get, man. Seriously, thank
use-
you so much. We're just
Yes,
joking
of course.
around, but yeah.
Yeah.
There you go. All right.
Send us a nice review. Give us a nice bunch of stars. And
Most importantly, follow Tangerine because these tickets are
and follow
courtesy of
Tangerine. Yes, of course. And thank you, Tangerine, for hooking us up with the tickets that we can now hook you up with.
There you go. Okay. Thanks everyone for listening. This has been the Hello and Welcome podcast presented by Betway, and we will catch you tomorrow night.